I never thought a simple ticket could ruin me, but it did. They gave it to her. My own family, the people I trusted, chose her over me. My sister-in-law, the one who always smiled like she owned everything. I watched as they laughed, handed her the ticket, and ignored my presence completely. Every word, every laugh, every smug look burned me from the inside. I wanted to scream, to cry, to disappear, but I did none of that. I waited, patiently, because I knew if I played this right, they would not just regret it, they would pay. And the moment came faster than anyone imagined. If you have ever been overlooked, betrayed, or humiliated by someone you trusted, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is not just about revenge. It is about justice, patience, and the thrill of watching karma unfold. Watch closely, because what happens next will leave you shaking with disbelief and satisfaction. My name is Emily, and I am 26 years old. I have always been the quiet one in my family, the one who observes more than she speaks, who listens more than she interrupts. I work as a graphic designer at a small firm, pouring every ounce of creativity into my projects. Yet somehow, no matter how hard I try, I always feel invisible, as if I am standing in someone else's shadow. My family has never been openly cruel, but subtlety has a sharper edge than any harsh word. I have learned that my accomplishments barely register, while my mistakes are quietly noted and remembered. My sister-in-law, Victoria, is everything I am not. She is 28, magnetic, effortlessly confident, and somehow always the center of every room she enters. She smiles like she owns the world, and everyone immediately notices. She knows exactly how to charm my parents, how to win conversations, how to make herself indispensable. Everything about her seems calculated, from the tilt of her head when she laughs to the way she leans forward to catch someone's attention. It is not just charm, it is entitlement. She believes she deserves everything, and she takes it without hesitation. I have tried to shine, tried to compete, but somehow I always feel invisible beside her. The family house where these gatherings happen has become her stage. The walls are painted a warm cream that glows in the late afternoon sun, and the chandelier in the dining room casts long dramatic shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The faint scent of her perfume drifts from the hallway, mingling with the rich aroma of roasted turkey and freshly baked pies. The living room hums with low conversation, the soft background murmur of the television, and the clinking of silverware. Every detail of the setting seems designed to highlight her. From the cushions perfectly fluffed on the sofa to the centerpiece she personally chose for the table. I remember one evening in particular, my father's birthday. I arrived early, hoping to help, hoping to contribute in some meaningful way, hoping that maybe tonight would be different. I washed vegetables, stirred sauces, arranged appetizers, all while listening to Victoria recount her week with her usual self-assured charm. Everyone laughed at her stories, complimented her outfit, praised her presence. I tried to mention a design project I had recently completed, but my words barely registered, floating into the air unnoticed. I knew I could not let this slide, but what could I do? As the evening wore on, the invisible line between us became suffocating. She claimed the best chair at the dining table, one with a velvet cushion I had once secretly hoped to sit in. She made subtle, pointed remarks about my hobbies, making them seem trivial. My parents smiled politely, but their eyes always found her first. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the sting of being overlooked, underestimated, humiliated in the quietest way possible. It is strange to feel embarrassed not by a single insult, but by a relentless pattern of invisibility. Little did they know everything was about to change. Watching Victoria move through the room with perfect posture and confident strides was infuriating. Every laugh, every glance, every compliment aimed at her reminded me of my own powerlessness in this family theater. I sipped my tea slowly, my hands trembling slightly, trying to appear calm, trying to convince myself this was just another routine evening, yet my mind was racing. I imagined her face when the tables finally turned. The shock that would freeze her, the disbelief that would linger on her lips. The thought sparked a small ember of satisfaction, the first flicker of a fire I had been nurturing quietly for years. I have always valued patience, observation, and strategy. But Victoria made me restless, caged, aware of the injustice but powerless to act. Every laugh she received, every chair she claimed, every conversation she dominated was a reminder of the silent war around Mia, war I had not yet entered fully, but one I was preparing to win. I memorized the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way people responded to her. There was power in observing, in waiting, in planning silently for the moment when my invisibility would finally end. By the time dessert arrived, I had made a silent vow. This would not continue. I would no longer be overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. I would claim my space, my recognition, my justice. I knew it would take patience, cunning, and courage, but the seed of satisfaction had already been planted. I was ready to watch it grow. The days after my father's birthday felt heavier than usual. Every family interaction seemed to revolve around Victoria, as if my presence was an afterthought. I tried to laugh along, tried to act normal, but every word she spoke, every glance she received, was a reminder of how invisible I had become. I found myself replaying that night over and over in my head, the memory of her smug smile carved into my mind like a permanent scar. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. At the next family gathering, the pattern repeated. Victoria arrived in a new dress, one that shimmered under the chandelier, drawing every eye immediately. She carried herself like royalty, and everyone treated her accordingly. My aunt complimented her hairstyle, my mother asked about her work, and my father laughed at a joke she barely made. I stood quietly by the side, helping set the table, trying to remain unnoticed, yet my eyes never left her. I noticed every tilt of her head, every flicker of her eyes, every subtle smirk she aimed at someone across the room. She seemed to take particular joy in reminding me of my place. She commented on my job with a laugh that implied it was trivial. She praised my cousin for achievements I had worked twice as hard for. She made gestures that were almost too small to notice the way she leaned into conversations, subtly blocking me from participating. I felt my chest tighten, a familiar mix of frustration and rage. I wanted to speak up, to assert myself, but I knew that any reaction now would only play into her hands. Patience had always been my ally. Little did she know, I was learning, observing, and preparing. Every family outing became a test of my endurance. Victoria would dominate conversations, laugh at the expense of others, and make subtle remarks that undermined me. At dinner, she criticized my choice of wine, though she had no knowledge of it. During board games, she would manipulate rules to her advantage, smirking as I tried to keep up. I felt like I was trapped in a maze where every path led back to her. My frustration was constant, gnawing at the edges of my composure. I had to remind myself not to react, to wait, and to observe. One afternoon, while helping my mother clean up after brunch, Victoria sauntered past, speaking loudly to my father about a vacation she had planned. I caught the glint in her eyes, the unspoken message that she was the favorite, that she belonged here more than I ever could. I gritted my teeth, feeling a rush of heat rise to my face. I imagined confronting her, but then I reminded myself that confrontation without strategy would be wasted energy. I needed more than just words. I needed control. I needed to strike in a way that she would never forget. At work, the situation followed me in subtle ways. Every time I mentioned a family event to a colleague, I realized how easily I minimized my own presence in my mind. I recounted stories where Victoria had stolen the spotlight, and even retelling them made me feel smaller. I realized that this pattern had been going on for years, slowly chipping away at my confidence. I felt a spark of clarity amidst the frustration. She had underestimated me, and that would be her greatest mistake. I began to see her arrogance not as invincible, but as a weakness I could exploit. Even mundane moments became charged with tension. During a weekend shopping trip with my parents, Victoria made offhand remarks about my clothing choices, suggesting that I lacked style. She laughed at a joke only she understood, leaving me on the outside of the moment. I forced a smile, but my mind was already racing, plotting, imagining the precise moment when her smugness would meet its match. Every small, slight added fuel to a fire that had been smoldering for years. I started to notice patterns, the way she reacted to certain situations, the way her confidence faltered when caught off guard, the way she relied on others to validate her every action. By the time the next holiday rolled around, I was exhausted by the constant mental gymnastics required to navigate her presence. Yet something had shifted. I was no longer just reacting. I was planning. I was observing with purpose. Every joke she told, every chair she claimed, every compliment she collected was a piece of the puzzle I was beginning to assemble. I could almost see the outlines of her downfall forming in my mind. It would take patience, cunning, and perfect timing, but the moment would come. Every glance from her, every laugh, every condescending comment now felt like a countdown. I waited for the perfect opening, studying her every move. I felt the tension coil inside me, a tight wire ready to spring. I knew I had to endure, to bide my time, to let her arrogance blind her to the storm that was coming. She had underestimated me, and she would regret it in ways she could not yet imagine. The fire inside me was no longer quiet. It was building. I reached my breaking point one rainy evening. The sky outside my apartment was a heavy gray, and the steady rhythm of raindrops against the window mirrored the tension coiling inside me. I had just returned from another family dinner. Another night where Victoria had claimed every ounce of attention, every ounce of praise, every ounce of space that should have belonged to me. She laughed at a joke I had thought of first. She received compliments on a dish I had spent hours preparing. And when I tried to speak, my words were swallowed by the din of her presence. I felt my chest tighten, my vision narrow, and a fury I had never allowed myself to fully feel rise like molten fire. I sat on my couch, gripping a mug of tea that had long since gone cold, and stared at the floor. My mind raced with every slight I had endured, every insult disguised as a compliment, every moment where she had overshadowed me. I could feel the years of frustration, invisibility, and underestimation crushing down on me, and I realized something important. Enough was enough. I would no longer be a passive observer in this game. I would no longer allow Victoria to define the boundaries of my life, to dictate my value, to determine my place. The first spark of the plan came from a single thought. She had underestimated me, and that was her greatest mistake. I began to replay everything I knew about Hertha, ways she relied on others for validation. The patterns in her arrogance, the small cracks she left unguarded when she thought no one was paying attention. Every observation I had made over the past months became a piece of the puzzle, and I started to see the contours of the strategy forming in my mind. I realized that this was not just about one family dinner, or one event, or one slight. This was about reclaiming my presence, my power, my dignity. I started to map it out in detail, like a general planning a battle. Every family event she had scheduled, every opportunity she had used to show dominance, became part of my blueprint. I made notes, mentally cataloging the weaknesses I had observed, the way she relied on flattery to feel secure, the subtle arrogance that left her overconfident, the situations where she had assumed her position was untouchable. I imagined each step of the plan, each movement timed perfectly, each word chosen with precision. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, mind racing with possibilities. I could hear the rain against the window, each drop a metronome keeping pace with my growing anticipation. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. My revenge would not be impulsive. It would be calculated, measured, and inescapable. I would create a moment so unforgettable, so shattering, that Victoria would never again assume she could overshadow me. Little did she know, the fire she had ignited within me was now fully ablaze. By morning, the plan had taken shape. I would use her own arrogance against her. I would expose her reliance on others, her obsession with being the center of attention in a way she could not ignore. Every detail mattered: the timing, the environment, the people involved. I imagined the setting as clearly as a painter imagines a canvas. The lighting, the sounds, the reactions. I could see the expressions on the faces of those who had always overlooked me. And I felt a rush of satisfaction imagining their realization when Victoria's dominance crumbled. I began to prepare, made lists, rehearsed conversations in my head, and visualized every possible outcome. I reminded myself that patience was essential. She had underestimated my patience, my observation, my ability to plan. That underestimation was her undoing. I felt a thrill run through me, equal parts fear and excitement. The fear was natural, but it sharpened my focus. The excitement reminded me that I was no longer powerless. I was ready to act, ready to take control, ready to claim the recognition I had been denied for far too long. Every interaction I had in the days that followed was colored by this new awareness. I listened more closely, observed more intently, and waited for the smallest opportunity. Every joke she told, every subtle insult, every gesture of superiority became fuel. I could feel the tension coiling in my chest like a spring ready to release. I imagined the moment when I would finally turn the tables, and a shiver ran down my spine. It would be perfect, because it would be completely unexpected. I knew I had to be strategic. I could not allow impatience to ruin what I had been carefully constructing. The smallest misstep would alert her, and I could not risk her guarding against me. I began to imagine scenarios, testing different approaches in my mind, refining the timing, sharpening the edges. Every detail had to be flawless. Every glance, every word, every pause would contribute to the eventual revelation of her miscalculation. By the end of that week, I felt a sense of clarity I had never known before. The frustration that had weighed me down for so long had transformed into determination, focus, and anticipation. Victoria had thought she had one, that I would remain in the background forever. She had underestimated the quiet, patient observer she had dismissed. And now she was about to learn the true meaning of underestimation. The plan did not begin with confrontation. It began with silence, with observation. Patience sharpened into something dangerous. I understood now that revenge was not about volume or speed. It was about timing. And Victoria had handed me the perfect opportunity without even realizing it. It started when she announced the upcoming family weekend trip. A small getaway, she called it. Tickets were limited, seating was limited, attention would be limited. And she made sure everyone knew she was the centerpiece of the entire plan. I watched her speak, watched the confidence in her posture, the careless certainty in her voice. She assumed she controlled the narrative. That assumption was the crack I needed. I did not challenge her. I smiled. I nodded. I played the role she expected me to play. Invisible, agreeable, unthreatening. Inside, my mind was already moving several steps ahead. I began preparing quietly, methodically, the way I always had. Only now there was purpose behind every move. First, I gathered information, not in obvious ways, in harmless conversations, in casual questions. I listened more than I spoke. I learned who was responsible for bookings, who valued fairness, who secretly felt overshadowed by Victoria but lacked the courage to say it aloud. People always talked more than they realized. All I had to do was listen. Then I positioned myself. I offered help. I volunteered for logistics. I framed it as kindness, as support, as me finally stepping up. No one questioned it. They never did. That was the beauty of being underestimated. It made people careless around you. Victoria barely glanced in my direction. She was too busy enjoying her spotlight. Late at night, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, lights dim, rain tapping against the window again like it knew something important was unfolding. I reviewed confirmations, schedules, seating assignments, policies, rules had power when applied at the right moment. And I intended to apply them perfectly. Every step was deliberate. I double-checked details. I rehearsed conversations in my head. I imagined her reaction, then adjusted the plan to make it sharper, cleaner, undeniable. There would be no screaming, no accusations, no chaos. The impact would come from precision. The day arrived faster than expected. The house buzzed with excitement. Laughter echoed through the rooms. Bags were packed, shoes lined the hallway. Victoria moved through the space like a queen surveying her kingdom, issuing instructions, basking in admiration. I stayed quiet, calm, focused. My heartbeat was steady, controlled, almost peaceful. At the transportation desk, everything slowed. The air felt heavier. I handed over the documents I had carefully prepared. The attendant reviewed them, nodded, then paused. A small pause. Almost invisible, almost meaningless. Except I noticed it. I always notice things like that. Victoria stepped forward confidently, already reaching for what she believed was hers. The attendant looked up and spoke calmly, professionally, with no emotion at all. A seat reassignment was required. Policy, verification, finalized earlier that morning. The smile on Victoria's face froze. She laughed at first, assuming it was a mistake. She always assumed mistakes favored her. I watched her confidence flicker when the attendant did not laugh back, when the explanation continued. When the words became undeniable, her voice sharpened, her posture stiffened. Eyes turned toward her, toward me. I said nothing. That was the hardest part, and the most powerful. I watched realization spread across her face slowly, like a shadow creeping across sunlight. She searched for support, for someone to override the situation, but there was nothing to override. Everything was documented, approved, final. For the first time, she was not the center of the moment by choice. She was the center by consequence. The room was silent except for the low hum of machinery and the shifting weight of people unsure where to look. I felt something release inside my chest. It's not joy, not cruelty, relief, validation, balance. She looked at me then. Really looked at me, and in her eyes I saw it. Confusion, embarrassment, the sudden understanding that I had not been as powerless as she believed. I met her gaze calmly. No smile, no apology, no explanation. 'Cause I owed her none. The rest unfolded quietly, efficiently. There were no dramatic outbursts. Just the subtle devastation of losing control in front of the very people she had always impressed. I took my place without fanfare, without announcement, exactly as planned. As we moved forward, I felt lighter with every step. Not because she had fallen, but because I had finally stood. I had not shouted to be heard. I had not begged to be seen. I had acted, and the result spoke louder than anything I could have said. She underestimated silence. She underestimated patience. She underestimated me. And that was the moment everything changed. The moment arrived faster than I had imagined, yet it felt like it had been building for years. The weekend trip, the stage I had been quietly preparing, became the arena of reckoning. Victoria walked into the room with her usual confidence, laughing, gesturing, and expecting admiration as always. Every eye followed her. Every compliment was ready to fall upon her shoulders. She did not notice me at first, as she rarely did. That was fine. It would make the impact even sharper. I stayed calm, my hands steady, my heart beating a controlled rhythm beneath my chest. Every detail had been orchestrated, every step calculated. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, though no one realized it yet. Victoria had no idea that the illusion she had maintained for years was about to crumble. She assumed she was untouchable, that her charm was invincible, that her entitlement guaranteed her favor. She was wrong. It began subtly. The attendant handed her the documents, the same documents I had arranged and verified earlier. She took them confidently, assuming her preferred arrangements were intact. Then the first crack appeared in her composure. Small frown, a hesitation. She read the confirmation carefully. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to the attendant, seeking reassurance, searching for a mistake, a loophole. There was none. I watched her face transform slowly. Confusion replaced confidence. Embarrassment replaced entitlement. Every muscle in her body seemed to tense as she realized the situation was beyond her control. I felt the tension in the room shift, the attention of the others drawn subtly toward the unfolding moment. The people who had always overlooked me, who had accepted her dominance without question, were now witnesses to a reversal that was undeniable. Her first attempt to speak was clipped, defensive. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice tight. The attendant shook his head, professional and unyielding. "Everything is correct. The assignments were confirmed this morning. No emotion, no apology, no indulgence." She had relied on others to cushion her, to excuse her, to validate her entitlement. None of that was available now. A shiver ran through me as the full weight of the moment became clear. The room held its breath. She opened her mouth again, trying to regain composure, but the words faltered. Every eye in the room was on her. My parents exchanged glances, finally seeing the cracks I had observed for months. My cousins leaned forward, catching the subtle tremble in her hands, the stiffness in her posture. She was exposed, her dominance dismantled by the patience, precision, and observation she had never noticed in me. I felt a rush of release flood through my body. It was not a cruel satisfaction. It was validation. Justice, recognition of the quiet strength that had always been there, the years of restraint, the careful planning, the silent endurance. I had done what she could not anticipate, what she could not control, what she could not undermine. And I had done it without a word of accusation, without shouting, without dramatics. The power of the moment lay in its inevitability. Her eyes finally found mine. They widened slightly, a mixture of disbelief and shock. For the first time she saw me, really saw me. Not as the quiet, invisible observer. Not as the agreeable presence she had always dismissed. She saw the calculated precision, the patience, the power that had been gathering beneath the surface for months, and in that gaze I saw something shift. Respect, fear, and realization all mingled in a single instant. The attendant confirmed the final details, and Victoria's shoulders slumped ever so slightly. She had tried to recover, but the structure of the plan was flawless. Her reliance on entitlement, her assumption of favor. Her arrogance, every weakness I had noted and waited for, had been exposed at exactly the right moment. The room remained silent for a beat. Then slowly, quietly, recognition spread among the others. Conversations hushed, glances exchanged, the unspoken understanding that something had changed. I stepped forward calmly, accepting my place in the moment without fanfare. I did not boast. I did not gloat. I simply existed fully in my power, fully in my presence, fully visible for the first time. The air felt lighter, the tension lifting. The silence finally filled with the understanding that the balance had shifted. Victoria could no longer command the room without consequence. Every glance she attempted to assert now was met with subtle resistance, subtle acknowledgement that her influence had limits. She realized, finally, that I had never been powerless, had simply waited, observed, planned, and now the culmination of patience and precision had delivered a result that no charm, no entitlement, no arrogance could undo. I felt the tension in my chest ease. Relief and satisfaction intertwined in a way I had never experienced. I had not just reclaimed recognition, I had demonstrated that power could be quiet, patient, and precise. And in that demonstration I had found something more profound. Freedom from invisibility, freedom from underestimation, freedom from the suffocating shadow she had cast over me for years. The moment passed, but its weight lingered. Victoria would remember it. I would remember it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Not triumphant in arrogance, but triumphant in truth. The silence of patience had spoken louder than any argument ever could. The days after the trip were quiet, but not in the way I had imagined. There was no celebration, no fanfare, no acknowledgement of what had occurred. Instead, there was a subtle shift in the air, a recognition that could not be ignored, a quiet understanding that the balance had changed. I walked through the family home with a new awareness. Every glance, every conversation, every interaction carried a weight I had not felt before. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer overlooked. I was fully present, fully acknowledged, and fully in control of my place in the world. Sitting alone one evening, watching the sunlight filter through the curtains, I reflected on what had happened. Revenge had not been about humiliation. It had not been about cruelty. It had been about justice, about reclaiming what had been mine for years: recognition, dignity, and respect. I realized that the satisfaction I felt was not about seeing Victoria falter. It was about asserting myself, about proving to myself that patience and intelligence could achieve what anger and impulsivity could not. I thought about the years I had spent standing in the shadows, quietly observing, silently enduring, and I understood that those years had not been wasted. Every slight, every underestimation, every moment of invisibility had taught me something essential: resilience, strategy, and the power of timing. I had learned that true strength does not always announce itself with volume or spectacle. Sometimes true strength waits, grows, and strikes when the moment is perfect. There was a subtle beauty in the way karma had unfolded. Victoria had relied on arrogance and entitlement to navigate the world, assuming that her charm and confidence guaranteed her dominance. She had underestimated the quiet observer, the one who took note of every detail, who noticed every pattern, who waited for the precise moment to act. And when that moment came, she could not escape it. The universe had a way of restoring balance, but it often required patience, awareness, and decisiveness. I had provided all three. I also reflected on myself. I realized that the act of planning, observing, and executing had transformed me. I was no longer simply reactive, waiting for circumstances to dictate my place. I had become proactive, shaping events, influencing outcomes, and asserting my presence with intention. There was a clarity in this power, a quiet confidence that did not rely on approval or admiration from others. I had discovered that the most profound validation comes from knowing your own capability, your own intelligence, and your own strength. Walking through family gatherings now felt different. I could participate without fear, without hesitation. I could speak and be heard. I could act and be acknowledged. And I could do so without anger, without seeking vengeance for the sake of cruelty, but with the knowledge that justice, patience, and strategy had restored equilibrium. I had grown not only in courage, but in wisdom. I realized that life is often a series of subtle battles, fought not with weapons or loud declarations, but with observation, patience, and intelligence. Those who underestimate others often leave themselves vulnerable. Those who rely solely on charm or entitlement are exposed when the quiet ones finally step forward. And those who endure, who watch, who learn, can achieve what those who act impulsively or arrogantly cannot. There is also a lesson in humility for me. While the satisfaction of seeing the balance restored was profound, I understood that true peace comes not from domination, but from self-realization. I had not needed to crush Victoria to assert myself. I had only needed to act with precision and clarity, allowing the natural consequences of her choices to unfold. In that, I found a serenity I had never known when living under the shadow of underestimation. I looked forward with a new perspective. I knew that life would continue to present challenges, and that not every battle would be won so quietly, so completely. But I also knew that I had learned essential truths. Patience is power, observation is strength, and timing is justice. The experience had reshaped me. I had stepped fully into my own agency, and nothing could diminish the confidence that came from that realization. Sitting by the window as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of completion. The storm of frustration, invisibility, and underestimation had passed. What remained was clarity, strength, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that balance had been restored. I had earned my place, reclaimed my dignity, and discovered the depths of my own resilience. And that realization, above all else, was enduring, unshakable, and profoundly liberating. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on the power of patience, observation, and strategy in your own life. Share your most satisfying story of reclaiming your strength in the comments below. Smash that like button if you felt every moment of this journey, and subscribe for more stories that inspire courage, resilience, and the quiet power within us all.